Hello, welcome to P2P. My name is Evan, and who's our guest today?
Hey, my name's
Oh,
Keefer. I'm a constituency assistant out in New Westminster working for the local MLA here. That is Judy Darcy. Just in my role as a constituency assistant, a lot of the work that I have to do involves connecting people with provincial resources and also just offering support wherever we can. In that line of work, I've had to help a lot of constituents often with tenancy rights and with housing issues. So hopefully I can speak to that. I am not a lawyer. A lot of the things that I know have just come out of working cases and learning as I go. So everything I've said, if you're like, that's not right, it is really honestly a good idea to check these things out yourself. Check out the Tenants Resource Advisory Center, get information that way. But MLA's offices are here to help however we can.
Evan, you are also with the Vancouver Tenants Union, right?
yeah, I'm with the Vancouver Tenants Union. Well, the Vancouver Tenants Union has been around for the last few years. I've been a member since November, and what they do is they're organizing buildings, setting up neighborhood chapters, and advocating for tenants' rights. Yeah, they've been doing a lot of work around COVID-19. They made a big push in the last several days for British Columbia government to declare an eviction moratorium throughout the remainder of the COVID-19 crisis.
Now, my question is, when you joined them, did you know what your rights were as a tenant?
I was, vaguely aware of my rights, but I've explored some of the resources, and there's a lot of rights I didn't know I had, or I feel like a lot of people vaguely know their rights, but there's a lot of nuances there that I learned only when I got involved with the tenants union and I was looking at different, guides and handbooks to rights. Yeah, Taylor?
People I find in general are just not really well educated about their rights as tenants, if they even are aware they actually have rights. I mean, kind of from my own experience as well, I feel a lot of people kind of just think their rights are what is on the lease and what the landlord says, and I don't know how much further a lot of people even think about them.
Yeah, Keefer helps people tell about their rights all the time.
Yeah, just building on what Taylor said, I think you're absolutely right. A lot of people don't actually know what their rights are until they need them or until they've been violated.
I know this is a really broad and vague question. It's like, hey man, so what are my rights as a renter? Tell me all of my rights right now. Could you tell me all of my rights, like in this one video that's probably not going to be longer than half an hour?
Do it.
No.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's a little harder than that, mostly because a lot of it is laid out in a provincial act on this, but it really comes down to each phase of tenancy. So like you have certain rights that come into play once you become a renter, you have certain rights as the tenant, and then you have certain rights once you're ending your tenancy. And it all kind of depends on the situation. But there are several resources that we can kind of list that help break down what your rights are and the best way to kind of find out before you need them.
Where would be a good place for people to start to collect that information?
Just like I can't hype it up enough, but there's a group called the Tenant Resource and Advisory Center, and their website is just tenants.bc.ca. Check it out now. Check it out as soon as you can. They're the ones who actually published the Renter Survivor Guide. It's something that used to come out in print, and there's still a couple print copies, but the entire thing is online on their website, and the entire thing, it breaks it down at each step of your tenancy, any issue you might have, right from like signing your lease, from the walkthrough, right to I'm being evicted. Is this a wrongful eviction? How do I dispute this? So it takes you through the entire process, and it's an incredible resource that everybody needs to read.
will it tell us our rights now as tenants in COVID-19 era? Is it an era? It's maybe not the right word to use.
I think it gives you a really good framework. And just with the changes that have come in with the government, a lot of those things, they don't necessarily conflict with what's already in there. It just kind of builds on it. So if someone was evicting you now, before you would be able to go to that resource guide, you could see, oh, they're evicting me for this reason, but that doesn't make any sense. Now we've closed all evictions for the time being for the COVID pandemic. So in that sense, it would supersede it. But if you are trying to figure out something else to do with your tenancy, or if you're not sure what was in your renter's agreement and you have a copy of it and you're just trying to double check that with what your actual rights are, that is a really good place to start.
Another question I have, it's kind of a concern, and it may or may not apply to me. I don't know. If you're watching this, landlord, I might be in an illegal suite. And what happens to people in illegal suites if they go to, let's say, the tenancy board and they try to help regarding a landlord? Is the landlord going to get in trouble? And if they do, is that going to come back to me? Like, what am I right?
It depends on what kind of suite it is. So if it's a suite where you just never had like a renter's agreement, there are certain parameters that say that's still a binding rental agreement. If you have your own space, if you have your own like kitchen feature, or you have your own locked doors, there's more specific guidelines. But as long as it counts, as long as it looks like what the RTA says is a rental unit, you're still protected as a renter. The difference is if you're in a rental suite or a legal suite where the suite itself is actually posing a danger to your health. Let's say that it's kind of cut off from any emergency exits, or there's certain things that are posing an immediate danger to you. That's a situation where you might not have the same protection because the immediate stress is getting you out of that house. And unfortunately, that's more dangerous now because of the situation we're living in.
That seems like a screwy rule. If you're in a less safe situation, why does it then follow that you would have less protections? Like, I get the logic that they're going to prioritize getting you out, but then if you have no other options, wouldn't you want the same rights?
It kind of comes down to like, is it better to have a roof over your head versus no roof? Some of those things come down to city bylaws as well, because it's usually the city bylaw officers or the local fire department that will enforce those more safety issues. So in those cases, sometimes the city will have a policy where it's the landlord's duty to find you new accommodation or to pay you compensation. But that really comes down to the individual city, unfortunately. Just before I forget, I think you were mentioning situations where your landlord might be doing certain things, or it might be an under the table kind of deal. So you don't have a written Tenancy Act or a written tenant agreement. Verbal tenant agreements do count in the RTB or covered under the RTA. It is harder to prove, but you do still have those same renters' rights, even if you don't have a physical written agreement, even if you just have a verbal one. So don't think that if you are in a suite, a rental suite, but it is not written down, you still do have rights that you would have normally. Yeah, so if you're trying to figure out if you are covered under the Residential Tenancy Act, TRAC has, Tenant Resource Advisory Center has, as part of their tenant survival guide, a list of what counts under the residential tenancy branch or the Residential Tenancy Act. So without listing it too much, just give you an idea. places like student housing, or places like if you are in an emergency shelter or as part of a housing cooperative, these aren't places that are usually covered by the Residential Tenancy Act. There are other laws that protect you that are more under common law, but they're less clear and harder to enforce than things covered in the Residential Tenancy Act.
But we know that after this emergency is over, that the eviction notices are going to go back to normal, right? Like that's the expectation. So what happens to people that might be in arrears after this pandemic is over, or at least until the emergency is lifted?
So on that note, all I can say is the Premier John Horgan has said that no one will be evicted due to COVID. Unfortunately, that's really loosely worded right now. So what we do know is that during this period, there won't be any evictions. That does raise the question of what happens once we're through this crisis. We know that the provincial government is still kind of figuring this out because we're in a pandemic, we're in a crisis. A lot of the effort is just on immediate aid or what we can do right away. But it's still up to the decision of what's going to happen as it keeps going. I think a lot of that conversation is something that really has to happen on a community level. So having community groups, having unions, having different groups kind of contributing to that conversation, I think it's a natural course. And I think that it's something that we're all going to have to work out as we go through this crisis.
Which is why now more than ever, localized coordination and organizing is important. And if you haven't yet, you should go watch our video on Neighbourhood Pods. We kind of go through being able to set up a neighborhood pod and get to know your neighbor, not face to face, because don't spread them germs, spread them groceries.
Keefer, so do you want to go with us? Who in British Columbia protects your rights, you being a tenant or a renter?
So it is a provincial, if you're talking about levels of government, it's usually a provincial matter. People who would protect your rights, we have the rental tenancy branch. They're a nonpartisan, non-political body, but they're kind of like the judiciary on this matter. So you might have heard, like, if you're disputing something, it's a claim that gets put before the rental tenancy branch, and they'll kind of go through it. One of the issues with that is that they're more on like a clinical, what does the law say kind of language. So they're not there to kind of necessarily advocate one way or the other. They're more there to just see, this is what the law says. If you are in a situation where you're not sure what your rights are, if you're not sure where to go, you're not alone. I think that's the biggest thing that I want to say. It's like, you're never alone in this situation. Often it might feel like you have a landlord who is aggressive and might make you feel like you don't have any rights, but you really do. So first off, you can always go to your MLA's office. They have lovely assistants sometimes who are there to help you out. We're not always perfect experts on it, but we're here to help you kind of go through it. There's also community organizations like the Vancouver Tenants Union who are also well knowledge in this. They're really good at organizing like neighborhoods or buildings. There's groups like ACORN. There's the Tenants Resource Advisory Center. TRAC. TRAC is always there as a really good resource. So don't think that you're in this alone. Don't think that you have to learn all of your rights on your own. There's other groups that are here to help you through that process as well.
So we have had an announcement about this $500 top off to your landlord by the provincial government. And it's like up to $500. Like, correct me if I'm wrong.
I will correct you, Taz, from the past. So we do have some updates. It's $300 per household with no dependents, and $500 for households with dependents. There's some talk of maybe roommates can apply separately, but that's yet to be seen, I think. Only for low to moderate income earners. You can apply in April and you'll get 3 months payment. Apply in May and you'll get the remaining 2 months payment. It's expected that the first payment will come in before the end of April. And the tenants have to start the application and the landlord finishes it. So some folks who are in legal suites have landlords saying, no, I'm not gonna, because they don't want to get caught. Anywho, for a full list of eligibilities, please check out www.bchousing.org/BCTRC.
We do know that to qualify for it, you need to have qualified for EI or other federal benefits or help right now. And the portal for CERB, the Canadian Emergency Relief Benefit Package, the portal for that is not going to be open until April 6th. April 1st is coming up. So I'm concerned that people may not have rent for April 1st. And in some cases, it will be fine because the landlords and the tenant might have a good relationship. They might come to an agreement or whatever. And in some cases, that might not be the case. My worry is what happens to the people that are not able to get that money in time, which we know won't get into people's hands until halfway through April, maybe at the earliest, right? So 2 to 3 weeks, people are waiting around. And if the situation gets worse and it makes people more desperate, and that relationship between a landlord and tenant breaks down, what can we do? And are there other measures that the federal or provincial government is thinking about to help renters out in this situation, or is this it?
So I know that there's still a lot of work happening in clarifying the language of it and making sure that people are being protected with the moratorium. Off the bat, if you're not able to pay, you're not going to get evicted, which means that the landlord legally can't do anything against you. If you have somebody who is completely insensitive and is doing something illegally, let's say they change your locks, that's something that a landlord is never allowed to do on their own anyways. They have to go through the RTB, and then even then they have to go through several steps. So they're breaking the law. You can call the police, you can call the RTB, and you can also call other local groups that can kind of help you in that situation, like the Tenants Union, like ACORN, like your MLA. You should let your MLA know as well. We don't want to see any tenants being taken advantage of in this situation. That's why the moratorium is in place. We know that we don't want anyone else ending up on the street during this situation. So we'll do what we can to make sure that your rights are protected and to make sure that you're staying in the home that you currently have.
So there's also this idea that your rights in regards to when and how a landlord can enter your home have also changed, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so before, I think the landlord used to have to give you, I think it was 24 hours notice before they could go into your suite. Because of the COVID pandemic, we've made it so that if you're afraid for your safety, they can't enter your suite for any reason other than if there is evidence of harm to a person or harm to the property itself, such as there's a flood and they need to get in to fix the pipes, or the building is on fire, or if they think that there's somebody dying on the other side of the door. Those are the only kind of situations where someone could enter your suite. Otherwise, they're not allowed to come in. They're not allowed to show the home. They can't have like an open house kind of situation where you have a lot of people coming into your home while we're trying to keep people distant and safe.
So we know that there's like rent banks and everything too,
Mm-hmm.
right? And people can apply for those still, I'm assuming. What kind of help do they like give you? Like, are these like you have to pay them back? Obviously, they're not just like. And how did that work? Like, I know that you have to be in arrears to be able to apply for some of them. Like, you have to.
It depends. There are several different rent banks throughout the Greater Vancouver and throughout BC. and the province has been trying to inject more money directly into those rent banks so that they can cover more people. We already are talking with rent banks like in Niccss and out in Vancouver. They're getting more and more people applying right now. So we know that there's that need. It doesn't hurt to apply. Usually there is a income threshold, or there has to be something that shows that you're going to be getting money coming in, like you've applied for EI, or like you have a new job or a job. But otherwise, you should apply anyways, just in case. They usually take them as a case-by-case basis, and they're usually interest-free. So you get the loan and you just have to pay it back as you do. It kind of depends on the rent bank itself. But there are situations where if you can't pay it back, they're not gonna come after you. They're not gonna send you to collections. There is usually a clause where if you've gone to a rent bank once and then you haven't paid it back, you can't go to the same rent bank. But if it can get you through the next month, if it can help you in that short term, that's what those rent banks are for. They're not a good systemic fix, but they do help keep a roof over your head in the immediate.
Are there measures that somebody might need to take, like, for example, there's an elderly person that you're sharing the house with, and you use the living room as a common area and the kitchen as a common area, and they really obviously need to access it. But if they're isolating and like actually self-isolating because they have symptoms, and they restrict that space, what can you do?
So while we were on the break, you brought this up, and I actually looked it up. And accommodations where the tenant shares a bathroom or kitchen with the owner of the property are technically not covered by the Residential Tenancy Act. So that's another one where things get a little bit dicier, a little bit harder. But if it's not in that kind of situation, if it's a different kind of common area, like a laundry room or like a gym space or like a shared meeting room, I think those are situations where the landlord is able to kind of close those facilities for safety. The laundry room, I might actually have to look up. That one seems more of like a practical, like everyone should have access to kind of thing.
That is so common to, like, every apartment I've ever had is had a shared laundry room.
Yeah, my old one used to have a shared laundry room. So now that I'm thinking about it, that's a little bit, I mean, they should probably be taking more safety measures to clean that space out, wipe it down, even if you as a user want to wipe it down after you're done, just to protect our fellow renters in their shared spaces. But I'm not sure right now if those are the kind of spaces they can limit. Places like a meeting room or like a gym where it's not explicit to your living in the space, but it is more written into your Tenancy Act that you would have access. Those are ones where, because we want to be limiting our interaction with each other, the landlord does have the right to kind of close those spaces down. One of the provincial responses to the COVID crisis has been a rent increase freeze. So even if a rent increase was issued to you before April 1st, if it was supposed to come into effect on April 1st, it doesn't count anymore. So it's an immediate freeze. And any rent increases going forward just doesn't count during this crisis. That's something that we can talk about going forward after the crisis. But as it stands right now for the crisis, there is a rent increase freeze. But what you were saying about disputing rent increases, there are very specific parameters for rent increases. It can only happen, generally speaking, once a year. And it can only go up by a certain amount. So I think right now it's just tied to inflation. Not right now because of the crisis, but right now in a broader sense. So if your landlord was doing something shady, or if they didn't issue you a proper rent increase notice, that is something that you can dispute. They have to give you 3 months notice. If they say, I'm going to give you a rent increase, and they don't give you the actual sheet, doesn't count until they've given you 3 months notice. That's something that you can dispute. So it's not an automatic increase. It is something that if you know they're not doing it in the correct manner, you can dispute it. Doesn't mean that they don't just give you they follow the actual circumstances, and then 3 months after that, you do end up with an increase, but it isn't automatic. They have to follow the rules, and they do have to go through the motions to issue you an increase.
In terms of all of these services right now, do we know how they're dealing with the pandemic? I mean,
without having a good answer for you, I'm sure they're probably dealing with it the same way that my work is dealing with it, the same way that a lot of service providers are, which is scared and overwhelmed and just figuring it out as we go. So if you do call TRAC, or if you call any groups, please be patient. We are here to try and help you through this, but we're also dealing with an overwhelming number of calls and emails. So we're here, but we're gonna have to do it patiently and together.
Just wanted to say that nobody can blame you. I mean, some people are making a fuss about how no official organization or anything's there to help us handling this well, or really knows what they're doing. But it's like, this is unprecedented in our lifetimes. Nobody has any idea what they're doing because we have absolutely nothing to draw on. There's no such thing as an expert on how to organize in a pandemic. Let me rephrase that. There isn't such a thing as an expert now because there's been no prior experience. We're building the experience. There isn't an expert yet. By the end of this, we'll have lots of expertise because we're through it.
Well, one thing is that being part of a lot of organizations, building on what Keefer said in the Vancouver Tenants, we're all figuring this out very fast. And I know that in some, people are talking about after COVID-19 how things go back to normal, and a lot of grassroots organizations are part of is that, like, when we go back to normal, we have to make sure things don't go back to normal, because there is the climate crisis, there is a housing crisis across this country. Things will change after COVID-19. So there are going to be crises like this we can expect in the next several years, a decade, and this is a historical moment for activists as communities and movements to gain the skills to bring that forward. And these videos and the organizations each of us participate in are part of that learning and growing process.
I also just want to point out that a lot of government decisions don't happen in a vacuum. A lot of them are usually kind of like a conversation, or they're based on who's pushing for what or what is needed. So we're seeing a lot of things that are coming out that are awesome and that honestly we needed a long time ago. And it just happens that we're getting them now. But then the conversation becomes what happens after the crisis is over. But if we know that these are things that we need, if these are things that people have been pushing for, and once people get a taste of it, it's a lot harder to kind of pull back on that. And that's where I think community organizing really has a strong point.
As soon as there was a serious impending risk, all the people saying, oh, we can't house all the homeless. How are we going to do that? Well, overnight, house homeless because there's a risk of spreading disease. That wasn't so hard. That took no effort. They did it.
I mean, we're talking about one crisis, but something that's really come up is that we're actually in the middle of two health crises. We're in the middle of overdose crisis, and the federal government stepped back, and we now have a form of safe supply in BC.
That's a big
Is that
one.
something that we want to pull back afterwards if we can demonstrate and see that it's saving lives? That's a conversation that's going to happen on the community level.
It's only fucking logical. You're saving lives.
Yeah, you can't keep saying, oh, well, we can't do this. This is impossible. This is something we can't do. It's not practical once it's already been done. You can't then just pull back and say, like, oh, we can't do the thing that we did before.
We're going to be in a situation where we're going to get through this health pandemic, this health crisis, but there's going to be a lot of aftershocks, a lot of after effects of it. And that's where we really need to keep pushing for a lot of protections for people, because it's not going to just be a like everybody's healthy, back to work kind of situation. There's going to be a lot of fallout. And that's where I think that a lot of community organizing, I mean, you were mentioning that I work for an MLA, but I'm not making any decisions, but I'm also unionized with BCGU. BCGU is another organization that is pushing for more tenant rights and more of a moratorium on rent, or sorry, just a rent freeze across the board. So it's really a community push. We know that things aren't going to just go back to normal. We know that there are still going to be people who are in vulnerable situations, and we don't want to leave them hanging. So keep organizing, keep pushing for things, and on the government side, hopefully people will be there to listen and to act on those things.
How much of this fire is the government feeling? Like all the public pressure that's going around?
So I think Vancouver Tenants Union has a letter writing campaign. I think there's a couple groups that have them, and we definitely hear it. We definitely get a lot of that feedback, either through calls or through emails or letters to our office. So there definitely is that feedback loop. We keep a track of how many people are messaging us. We print out messages for our MLA to read. So we're definitely making sure that our elected reps are informed, they're hearing what people are saying, and also the volume of it. So I think that there is a lot of power in organizing.
So thank you once again, everyone, for joining us. I just want to say that obviously this is a conversation that requires a bit more time and a bit more exploration. Unfortunately, we only have so much time, we only have so much capacity at the moment. Because we want to explore this more, because we want to understand it better, and we want to explore the different context of a renter's life, we would be happy to have any of the conversations that with anybody watching this. If you have a particular story that you think that people should hear about a particular situation, drop us a line. But for the time being, I hope you learned some of your rights. I hope you learn where to look for resources regarding your rights, because that's how we build power, not just for today, but moving forward. And that's why this was Power to People.